Margaret Jacobs, John Willard, Alice Parker, and Pudiator? Pudiator? I don't know. Abigail Soames, George Jacobs Jr., son of George Jacobs Sr., and father of Margaret Jacobs, Daniel and Andrew, Rebecca Jacobs, wife of George Jacobs Jr., and sister of Daniel Andrew, Sarah Buckley and her daughter Mary Witheridge.
Let's just say the whole village has been accused.
Pretty much. Why do you have no villagers?
Also including were Elizabeth Colson, Elizabeth Hart, Thomas Fair Sr., Roger Toothacker, Sarah Proctor, daughter of John and Elizabeth Proctor, Sarah Bassett, sister-in-law of Elizabeth Proctor, Susanna Roots, Mary DeRich, another sister-in-law of Elizabeth Proctor, Sarah Peace, Elizabeth Carey, Martha Carrier, Elizabeth Fosdick, Wilmot Red, Sarah Rice, Elizabeth Howe, Captain John Alden, son of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins, William Proctor, son of John and Elizabeth Proctor. This is important because all these people are not remembered. Like John Flood, Mary Toothacker, wife of Roger Toothaker and sister of Martha Carrier, and her daughter Margaret Toothaker, and Arthur Abbott. When the court of Oyer and Terminer convinced that at the end of May, the total number of people in custody were 62. 62 people out of a small Puritan town.
That's a lot of people.
But, like, it's important to say all their names because a lot of people... I didn't even know all those people. They're not mentioned in the Crucible and stuff. Like,
no, but they mention how many people.
But it's just important to hear the names. Like, it's a remembrance thing.
It's important. Cotton Mather wrote to one of the judges, John Richards, a member of his congregation, on May 31st, 1692, expressing his support of the prosecutions, but cautioning him, do not lay more stress on pure spectral evidence than it will bear. It is very certain that the devils have sometimes represented the shapes of persons, not only innocent, but also very virtuous, though I believe that the just God then ordinarily provides a way for the speedy vindication of the persons thus abused. So basically, if they're not a witch and you kill them, at least God will spare their souls at that point.
The court of Oyer and Terminer convened in Salem in Salem town on June 2nd, 1692, with William Stotner, the new lieutenant governor, as chief magistrate, Thomas Newton as the crown attorney prosecuting the case, and Stephen Sewell as clerk.
like Umbridge.
Oh, Jesus.
Bridget Bishop... Yeah. Let me try that one more time. Bridget Bishop's case was the first brought to the grand jury, who endorsed all the indictments against her. Bishop was described as not living a Puritan lifestyle, where she wore black clothing and odd costumes, which was against the Puritan code. When she was examined before her trial, Bishop was asked about her coat, which had been awkwardly cut or torn in two ways. Now see, back then the Puritans only wore gray or brown.
Don't wear the devil's color. Red or black.
Gray or brown. Those were the only colors they were allowed to wear.
Heaven forbid you have a tear in your dress, because you're poor and you can't afford to fix it. And you made your own back then, so good luck. This, along with their immoral lifestyle, affirmed to the jury that Bishop was a witch. She went to trial the same day and was convicted.
I am so hungry, babe. On June 3rd, that's my brother's birthday, the grand jury endorsed indictments against Rebecca Nurse and John Willard, but they did not go to trial immediately for reasons which were unclear. Bishop was executed by hanging on June 10th, 1692. Dun dun dun.
Immediately following this execution, the court adjourned. It's spelled weird. AD.
That's how it's spelled.
For 20 days until June 30th. While it sought advice from New England's most influential ministers upon the state of things as they soon stood, their collective response came back, dated June 15th and composed by Cotton Mather.
I almost asked where your phone was.
Recording us.
Okay, so this is like
What?
numbered for a bit.
Yes.
So I get number 1, apparently. The afflicted state of our poor neighbors that... Oh, is this the indictment thing?
Yes.
Okay. The afflicted state of our poor neighbors that are now suffering by molestations from the invisible world, we apprehend so deplorable that we think their condition calls for the utmost help of all persons in their several capacities. Oh my.
We cannot but with all thankfulness acknowledge the success which the merciful God has given into the sedulous and assiduous endeavors of our honorable rulers to detect the abnormal witchcrafts which have been committed in the country.
The sinners!
Humbly praying that the discovery of these mysteries and mischievous wickedness may be perfected.
The sinners must die. 3. We judge that in the prosecution of these and all such witchcrafts, there is need of a very critical and exquisite caution, lest by too much credulity for things received only upon the devil's authority, there may be a door open for a long train of miserable consequences, and Satan get an advantage over us, for we should not be ignorant of his devices.
Dun, dun, dun. I should put a picture of Satan.
You should.
As in complaints upon witchcrafts, there may be matters of inquiry which do not amount unto matters of presumption, and there may be matters of presumption which yet may not be matters of conviction. So it is necessary that all proceedings thereabout be managed with exceeding tenderness towards those that may be complained of, especially if they have been persons formerly of any unblemished and reputation. Remember, this is Old English.
Better than that crap we were reading the other day. Edgar Allan Poe. It was so old that we were like...
No, not Edgar Allan Poe.
Not Edgar Allan Poe.
H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft. It was so bad that we were like, what does that
No,
even
it was
mean?
Hills Have Eyes.
Yes! The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah.
It was bad. We didn't even know what was being said. We were like, I don't know, it's some word.
It wasn't even like
Geen?
Bible language.
What's Geen?
It wasn't even Bible language.
Or game, but it was spelled funny. It was weird.
Because it's uneducated, like they didn't know how to spell. These are just big words.
When the first inquiry is made into the circumstances of such as many lie under the just suspicion of witchcrafts, we should wish that there may be admitted as little as is possible of such noise, company, and openness as may to hastily expose them that are examined, and that there may no thing be used as a test for the trial of the suspected, the lawfulness whereof may be doubted among the people of God, but that the directions given by such judicious writers as Perkins and Bernard be consulted in such a case. See, the problem is, if we don't understand it now, how the fuck did they understand it then?
Jeez, there's a couple more.
Oh, Lord.
Should we skip them?
No, keep reading.
Presumptions whereupon persons may be committed, and much more convictions whereupon persons may be condemned as guilty of witchcraft, ought certainly to be more considerable than verily the accused, persons being represented by a spectre, who unto the afflicted, inasmuch as it is an undoubted and notorious thing that a demon may, by God's permission, appear even to ill purposes, in the shape of an innocent and virtuous man. Nor can we esteem alterations made in the sufferers by a look of or touch of the accused to be an infallible evidence of guilt. Infallible, but frequently liable to be abused by the devil's legerdemains, like like Legermans. I don't know.
I don't know.
Legermans.
I don't know.
If you guys know what that means, tell me. I'm guessing his demons.
What if you look it up?
Oh, no. Wait, I want to look it up. You look it up.
We know not whether some remarkable affronts given to the devil by our disbelieving those testimonies whose full force and strength is from them alone, may not put a period unto the progress of the dreadful calamity begun upon us, in the accusations of so many persons, whereof some we hope are yet clear from the great transgression laid on unto their charge.
I understand these people are legitimately, like, educated, but Jesus. They need Jesus.
I think the problem isn't that they're
educated, that's the thing.
No, I'm saying I think the problem is that they use too many words to explain something that shouldn't be.
I don't know if it's just because we're new age American language. We're just too lazy
Okay,
now.
I know some of these words.
Well,
even some of the bigger ones.
I know. I understand what they're saying, but it's just the fact that we don't use those words.
What I'm saying is that they're using 10 words when they could just use 4. You see what I'm saying? Like, instead of saying "hear unto them" or something like that, you could just say "unto them." you know.
Nevertheless, we cannot be humbly recommended unto the government the speedy and vigorous prosecution of such as have rendered themselves obnoxious, according to the direction given in the laws of God and the wholesome statutes of the English nation, for the detection of witchcrafts. We're finally done with that section.
Okay, on to the stuff we can understand better. Hutchinson sums the letter. It was a letter. The two first and the last sections of this advice took away the force of all others, and the prosecutions went on with more vigor than before. So this was him saying, let's slow it down, look at all the facts, figure it out.
You have to have.
They basically took the first one and the last one and said, fuck the rest, we're just going to go with it.
Yeah, because he's saying you have to have proof, like physical proof that that's what's happening to them.
Ridiculous.
Reprinting the letter years later in Magnolia, Cotton Mather left out these two first and last sections. Major Nathaniel Salton Cell ESQ, I don't know. Esquire resigned from the court on or about June 16th, presumably dissatisfied with the letter and that it had not outright bared the admission of spectral evidence. See, he wants more evidence, the spectral evidence. That's what they're pissed off about.
According to Upham, Saltonstall deserves the credit for being the only public man of his day who had the sense or courage to condemn the proceedings at the start.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 7. More people were accused, arrested, and examined, but now in Salem town by former local magistrates John Hathorne, Jonathan Corwin, and Bartholomew Gidney, who had become judges of the court of Oyer and Terminer, suspect Roger Toothacre died in prison on June 16th, 1692.
This is all a lot of information. We apologize.
It's
No, I'm just saying, like, it's a long one. There's a lot of information to take in. Break it up if you need to. From June 30th through early July, grand juries endorsed indictments against Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Proctor, John Proctor, Martha Carrier, Sarah Wilds, and Dorcas Hoare. I really think there's got to be another way to say that. Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, and Sarah Wilds, along with Rebecca Nurse, went to trial at this time, where they were found guilty.
Of course. All 5 of them were executed by hanging. On July 19th, 1692, in mid-July, the constable in Andover invited the afflicted girls from Salem village to visit with their wife to try to determine who was causing her afflictions.
Jeez Louise. Let's see. Where am I? That one? Okay. Anne Foster, her daughter Mary Lacey Sr., and granddaughter Mary Lacey Jr. all confessed to being witches. Anthony Checkley was appointed by Governor Phipps to replace Thomas Newton as the Crown's attorney when Newton took an appointment in New Hampshire.
In August, grand jury indictment indicted George Burroughs, Mary Este, Martha Corey, and George Jacobs Sr. Trial juries convicted Martha Carrier, George Jacobs Sr., George Burroughs, John Willard, Elizabeth Proctor, and John Proctor. Elizabeth Proctor was given a temporary stay of execution because she was pregnant.
Ooh. So pregnant women get a little time.
Yeah, because,
Would
it's not the
baby
baby's
be a
fault.
witch?
No, it's not the baby's fault. The mom was a witch. I'm guessing that's why. I don't think they were accused to.
On August 19th, 1692, Martha Carrier, George Jacobs Sr., George Burroughs, John Willard, and John Proctor were executed. Of course they were.
Mr. Burroughs was carried in a cart with others through the streets of Salem to execution. When he was upon the ladder, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocency, with such solemn and serious expressions as which to the admiration of all present. His prayer, which he concluded by repeating the Lord's Prayer, as witches were not supposed to be able to recite, was so well worded and uttered with such composedness.
Okay.
As such fervency of spirit as was very afflicting, and drew tears from many, so that it seemed to some that the spectres would hinder the execution.
Ooh. The accuser said the black man, devil, stood and dictated to him.
The black man.
As soon as he was turned off, hanged, Mr. Cotton Mather, being mounted upon a horse, addressed himself to the people, partly to declare that he, Mr. Burroughs, was no ordained minister, partly to possess the people of his guilt, saying that the devil often had been transformed into the angel of light.
So now, even though you can say the Lord's Prayer, apparently it doesn't count.
Right? What the
And this did somewhat appease the people, and the executions went on. When he, Mr. Burroughs, was cut down, he was dragged by a halter to a hole or grave between the rocks about 2 feet deep. His shirt and breeches, B-R-E-E though,
yeah, it's
being pulled
breeches
off, and an old pair of trousers of one executed put on his lower parts. He was so put in together with Willard and Carrier that one of his hands with his chin and a foot of one of them was left uncovered. Robert Caliph Moore wondered if of the invisible world.
Interesting. In September, grand juries indicted 18 more people. The grand jury failed to indict William Proctor, who was rearrested on new charges. Of course he was.
On September 19th, 1692, Giles Corey refused to plead as arraignment and was killed by painfort a form of torture in which the subject is pressed beneath an increasingly heavy load of stones. In an attempt to make him enter a plea, 4 pleaded guilty, and 11 others were tried and found guilty. They should be found not guilty. He was the only one that was pressed. You'll hear about it.
That's awful. Confess, you wonderful witch. What the fuck? That's so messed up. On September 20th, Cotton Mather wrote to Stephen Sewell that I may be the more capable to assist in lifting up a standard against the infernal enemy, requesting a narrative of the evidence given at the trials of half a dozen, or if you please, a dozen of the principal witches that have been condemned.
Yeah, give me evidence, people. On September 22nd, 1692, 8 more persons were executed. After execution, Mr. Noyes, turning him to the bodies, said that what a sad thing it is to see 8 fire brands of hell hanging there.
Okay.
Douchebag.
That's some crazy shit right there. Crazy. I'm gonna say darkest horror. Was given a temporary reprieve when, with the support of several ministers, to make a confession of being a witch.
Mary Bradbury, aged 77, managed to escape the help by family and friends. Abigail Faulkner Sr. was pregnant and given a temporary reprieve. Some reports from the era say that Abigail's reprieve later became a stay of charges. Well, that's nice.
Awesome. Mather quickly completed his account of the trials, wonders of the invisible world, and it was given to Phipps when he returned from the fighting in Maine. In early October, Burb says both Phipps' letter and Mather's manuscript must have gone to London by the same ship in mid-October. Sorry, having acid.
Hereby declare this: as soon as I come, I'm fighting, and understand what danger some of their innocent subjects might be exposed to, if the evidence of the afflicted persons only did prevail either to the committing or trying any of them. I did, before any applications was made under me about it, put a stop to the proceedings of the court, and they are now stopped till their Majesty's pleasure be known. Governor Phipps, Boston, October 12th, 1692.
On October 29th, Judge Sewall wrote, "The court of Oyer and Terminer counted themselves thereby dismissed, asked whether the court of Oyer and Terminer should sit, expressing some fear of inconvenience by its fall. The governor said it must fall."
Perhaps be coincidence, Governor Phipps' own wife, Lady Mary Phipps, was among those who had been called out upon around this time. After Phipps' order, there were no more executions.
So when his wife came up, he stopped him.
Of course.
In January 1693, the new Superior Court of Judicature, Court of Assize, and General Gaol Delivery convened in Salem, Essex County, again headed by William Stoughton as Chief Justice and Anthony Checkley continuing as the Attorney General, and Jonathan Ellison as Clerk of the Court.
The first 5 cases tried in January 1693 were of the 5 people who had been indicated but not tried.
Indicted but not
tried. In September, Sarah Buckley, Margaret Jacobs, Rebecca Jacobs, Mary Withridge, and Job Tookie.
Job, actually. The name is Job.
Oh, Job.
All were found not guilty. Grand juries were held for many of those remaining in jail. Charges were dismissed against many, but 16 more people were indicted and tried. Ow. 3 of whom were found guilty: Elizabeth Johnson, Jr., Sarah Wardwell, and Mary Post.
When Strautner wrote the warrants for the execution of these 3 and others remaining from the previous court, Governor Phipps issued pardons, sparing their lives. In late January, early February, the court sat again in the Charlestown, Middlesex County, and held grand juries and tried 5 people: Sarah Cole of Lynn, Lydia Dustin and Sarah Dustin, Mary Tyler, and Mary Toothaker.
All were found not guilty, but were not released until they paid their jail fees. Lydia Dustin died in jail on March 10th, 1693. Son of a bitch.
In the end of April, the court convened in Boston, Suffolk County, and cleared Captain John Alden by proclamation.
That's Suffolk.
Suffolk.
Ow, ow, ow.
Proclamation. It heard charges against a servant girl, Mary Watkins, for falsely accusing her mistress of witchcraft.
Her mistress.
Mary, you're gonna charge the girls who were falsely accusing people.
In May, the court convened in Ipswich, Essex County, and held a variety of grand juries. They dismissed charges against all but 5 people: Susanna Post, Eunice Fry, Mary Bridges Jr., Mary Barker, and William Barker Jr. were all found not guilty at trial, finally putting an end to the series of trials and executions.
Where?
Wait. No, I just did that one.
After someone concluded that a loss, illness, or death had been caused by witchcraft, the accuser entered a complaint against the alleged witch with the local magistrates. If the complaint was deemed credible, the magistrates had the person arrested and brought in for public examination, essentially an interrogation where the magistrates proceed the accused to confess.
It's raining.
Oppress the accusers. Confess.
It's raining. It's raining. It's raining. I love it when it rains.
It's crazy.
I'm not crazy. I just love it when it rains. Bite me.
Go.
If the magistrates at this local level were satisfied that the complaint was well founded, the prisoner was handed over to be dealt with by a superior court.
Dealt with.
Dealt with.
In 1692, the magistrates opted to wait for the arrival of a new charter and governor who would establish a court of oyer and terminer to handle these cases.
The next step at the superior court level was to summon witnesses before a grand jury.
A person could be indicted on charges of afflicting with witchcraft or for making any unlawful covenant with the devil. Covenant. Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Ugh, my neck hurts.
Once indicted, the defendant went to trial sometimes on the same day, as in the case of the first person indicted and tried on June 2nd, Bridget Bishop, who was executed 8 days later on June 10th, 1692. It is really starting to come down.
There were 4 execution dates with one person executed on June 10th, 1962. 1692. Gosh, sorry.
1962, yes, that's
Apparently I'm dyslexic today.
accurate. This one?
Yes.
5 executed on July 19th, 1692. Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds.
Another 5 executed on August 19th, 1692. Martha Carrier, John Willard, George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., and John Proctor.
8 on... Ow! Stupid me.
Jeez.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
8 on September 22nd, 1692. Mary Easty, Martha Corey, Ann Pudiator, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Parker, Alice Parker, Wilmot Red, and Margaret Scott.
Great Scott.
Great
Let's see.
Scott.
Several others, including Elizabeth Bassett, Proctor, and Abigail Faulkner, were convicted but given temporary reprieves because they were pregnant. I'd say I was pregnant too.
I think there'd have to be proof that you were pregnant in order
Back
for
then,
that to be.
what would the proof be?
I don't know, but I'm saying. Bite me, I'm working on it.
It's already an hour.
You were talking. 5 other women were convicted in 1692, but the death sentence was never carried out. Mary Bradbury in absentia, Anne Foster, who later died in prison, Mary Lacey Sr., Foster's daughter, Dorcas Hoare, and Abigail Hobbs.
Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer from the southeast end of Salem called Salem Farms, refused to enter a plea when he came to trial in September. Now it's going to get into it.
The judges applied an archaic form of punishment called
It's that French word.
peine forte de durer. I'm sure I butchered the shit out of that. In which stones were piled on his chest until he could no longer breathe. After 2 days of peine forte et durer, Corey died without entering a plea.
His refusal to plead is usually explained as a way of preventing his estate from being confiscated by the crown, but according to historian Jadwick Hansen, much of Corey's property had already been seized, and he had made a will in prison. His death was a protest against the methods of the court.
Interesting.
Well done. We already did that side.
You did? Oh, good. Thank God. The contemporary critic of the trials, Robert Califf, wrote, Giles Corey pleaded not guilty to his indictment, but would not put himself upon trial by the jury. They having cleared none upon trial, spelled trial wrong, and knowing there would be the same witnesses against him, rather chose to undergo what death they would put him to.
One of the things he famously said, I don't know if it ever says in here, is he kept saying more weight when they asked him if he was a witch.
That's funny.
As convicted witches, Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey has been excommunicated from their churches and denied proper burials.
Yeah. Oh. As soon as the bodies of the accused were cut down from the trees, they were thrown into a shallow grave and the crowd dispersed. You actually missed one. I'll read it. Oral history claims that the families of the dead reclaimed their bodies after dark and buried them in unmarked graves on family property.
The record books of the time do not note the deaths of any of those executed.
Really, that sucks.
That's why it's important for us to read their names.
I didn't say it was a bad thing, I just said it's a lot. Much, but not all, of the evidence used against the accused was spectral evidence or the testimony of the afflicted who claimed to see the apparition or shape of the person who was allegedly afflicting them. Now, see, I am under the impression that even if they saw a specter, how do they know it was from that person?
And how do you know they were not crazy?
Or that.
The theological dispute that ensued about the use of the evidence was based on whether a person had to give permission to the devil for his or her shape to be used to afflict.
What? Opponents claimed that the devil was able to use anyone's shape to afflict people, but the court contended that the devil could not use a person's shape without the person's permission. Therefore, when the afflicted claimed to see the apparition of a specific person, that was accepted as evidence that the accused had been complicit with the devil. Which is bullshit.
Cotton Mather's The Wonders of the Invisible World. With that paper.
Gosh.
Was written with the purpose to show how careful the court was in managing the trials. Unfortunately, the work did